Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today for our Monday Healing Step session here in the Bridge to Healing community. Whether you're watching live or catching the replay, I want to honor you for being here, for making space for your healing, even in the middle of everything else you're already holding. So, if this is your first time joining us, I'm Janine Naus, your grief and trauma relief specialist. I combine my personal experience as a trauma survivor with years of professional training to walk beside you as you navigate what can often feel like the most tender, overwhelming, and misunderstood parts of your healing journey. Now, if you're watching the replay, go ahead and type pound replay in the comments so I can welcome you and acknowledge your presence. And if you're with me live, say hello and type pound live. I'd love to know where you're joining me from today. So I want everyone to go ahead and take a breath with me before we begin. So go ahead and inhale. Now exhale. Beautiful. Now, today we're entering into a conversation that might touch something soft and unspoken in you. And we're talking about a kind of grief that many people carry, but few people ever see. It's a kind of grief that isn't loud, that doesn't come with a clear explanation or a socially accepted script. This is the grief that doesn't get a funeral, that doesn't come with casseroles or sympathy cards, that doesn't always have a name, because what you lost wasn't something others could easily see. And we're talking about grief that feels invisible, the grief of losing a part of yourself, the grief of losing safety, identity, connection, direction, or even the future you once imagined. And it might be the grief of being betrayed by someone you loved, the grief of leaving a toxic relationship, but still feeling the ache of what you hoped it could be, the grief of realizing your childhood wasn't what you needed, or that a parent couldn't show up for you the way you deserved. And because no one named it, you may have started to wonder if it was real, if it counted, if it deserved to be grieved at all. So here's what I want you to know as we begin. Grief doesn't need permission to be valid. It doesn't have to be visible to be real. And you've been carrying invisible grief. The space is for you. You don't have to keep holding it alone. You don't have to explain it. You just have to show up exactly as you are. So let's begin by gently exploring what this kind of grief really is and why it often goes unrecognized and why it can be so hard to name, even to ourselves. So let's begin with this question. What does invisible grief really look like? It's not always obvious, and it's not always tied to a specific event or a timeline. And in fact, what makes it invisible is that it often happens quietly, internally, and without acknowledgement from the outside world. It can show up in the ache of what you never got, the mothering you long for but never received, the safety you should have had but didn't, the goodbye you never got to say, because there was never really a clear ending, just a slow unraveling. And you might be grieving the years you spent in survival mode, the parts of yourself you had to shut down just to make it through, or the dreams you let go of because you were too overwhelmed just trying to stay afloat. It's the grief of a life that looks fine on the outside, but doesn't feel whole on the inside. That kind of grief that no one ever asks about because they assume you're okay, or because they never knew what you were holding in the first place. And that's what makes it so painful. Not only are you carrying the grief, but you're also carrying the aloneness of it. Maybe you've heard yourself say, I shouldn't feel this way. It happened so long ago. Other people have it worse. Or I'm supposed to be over this by now. Now, these are the voices of internalized silence. learn from a world that doesn't know how to hold invisible grief. But I want to offer you something different today. I want you to know just because others couldn't see the impact of your loss doesn't mean it wasn't real. And just because your grief wasn't acknowledged doesn't mean it doesn't deserve space. See, isn't only about death, it's about loss, it's about rupture, it's about the breaking of something meaningful, even if it wasn't tangible. And your nervous system, your heart, knows that something was lost, even if no one else named it, even if you haven't fully named it yet yourself. This is where the healing begins, by honoring what's been left unspoken, not by rushing into fixing it, but by sitting with it gently, by saying to yourself, yes, that did matter. Yes, I still feel the impact of that. Let's take a moment together now to reflect on what your invisible grief may be asking for. So we're going to go ahead and pause here together, not to rush past the emotion, but to make space for what might be quietly rising within you right now. I want to ask you something gently, and you don't need to have the right answer. Just notice what comes up for you, even if it's just a feeling. Have you ever found yourself grieving something that no one else recognized? Something you didn't know how to explain, or maybe even felt guilty for feeling? It might have been a relationship that ended but never had closure, a version of yourself you had to leave behind to survive, or the realization that someone you deeply needed, emotionally, physically, spiritually, was never truly there for you. If that resonates, feel free to type yes in the comments if you feel comfortable, or share a word that describes how that moment felt for you. You are not alone in that feeling, and what you experienced matters. The world may not have seen your grief, but your body did, your heart did, your nervous system did. And just by naming it here, even silently, you've taken a powerful step toward acknowledging your own truth. That truth doesn't need to be justified. It doesn't need to be compared. It only needs to be seen by you. So let's now explore why this kind of grief so often gets buried and what begins to shift when we finally give it room to breathe. Now, you might be wondering right now, why didn't I realize I was grieving? Why did I bury it for so long? Why does it still come up after all this time? The answer is not because you're weak or broken or incapable of letting go. It's because there wasn't space. There wasn't safety. There may not have been even been language for what you were feeling. Invisible grief often gets buried because the world around you didn't know how to hold it. So you learned to hold it alone. You or you were told to move on or stay strong or don't dwell, be grateful. So instead of processing your grief, you became a master of coping and you kept going. You smiled through it. You poured yourself into work or caretaking or staying busy because that's what your nervous system knew how to do. But buried grief doesn't disappear, it waits. It lives in the tension in your shoulders, the fatigue you can't explain, the unexpected tears that surface out of nowhere, the emotional numbness that makes it hard to feel much of anything. You didn't fail, you adapted. And those adaptations helped you survive. But now, your system may be letting you know that you're safe enough to feel what you couldn't feel before. Not all at once, not in a flood, but slowly and gently with support. And when you start to give your grief a voice, when you stop waiting for someone else to validate it, you begin to reclaim something sacred, your right to your own experience. So let me share a personal story from my own life that I hope will help with this land with you more deeply. I remember a time when I thought I had already grieved everything I needed to grieve. I had worked through a lot, I had healed so much, and yet one afternoon I found myself crying hard over something that felt small. A conversation, a tone, a moment that didn't seem significant on the surface, but the emotion that came up didn't match the moment. And I knew immediately this wasn't about now. I sat there, tears pouring out, not fully understanding why, and slowly I realized I wasn't grieving the moment that had just happened. I was grieving something much older. It was the grief of losing a version of myself that had been silenced for years, the grief of needing support I never received, the grief of having to stay strong, put together, and okay for everyone else, while inside I felt hollow and unseen. No one had ever named that loss. I didn't even know I could name it. So I convinced myself that because no one else acknowledged it, it must not have mattered. But that day, sitting in stillness, something in me whispered, it did matter. And for the first time, I let that truth rise. I didn't push it away. I didn't rationalize it. I simply stayed with it. And in that moment, something shifted, not in a dramatic, everything's fixed kind of way, but in the softest way. And I gave myself permission to grieve something no one else saw. And that permission became a form of healing I didn't even know I needed. That's what I want you to know today. You don't have to keep minimizing what was lost. You don't need someone else to validate it. You get to honor it yourself. Let's move into a simple grounding practice now, one you can return to anytime the weight of unspoken grief begins to rise. So, after we become aware of what we've been carrying, the next question often is, now what? What do I do with all of this? It can feel overwhelming to finally let something rise that's been buried for so long. So, let's not rush into doing. Let's begin with being. Being with your grief in a way that is safe, intentional, and kind. And I want to guide you through a gentle practice, something you can return to whenever you feel that ache rise, or when you're not sure what you're feeling, but you know something needs care. And go ahead and find a comfortable seated position. And if it feels safe, close your eyes or soften your gaze. And then place one hand over your heart or wherever you feel your emotion lives in your body. And take a slow, steady breath in and exhale. Let yourself land here. Now gently say to yourself, either silently or out loud, I honor what I've lost, even if no one else saw it. I give space to what still hurts, and I don't have to justify it. This grief is mine, and I meet it now with compassion. Stay with your breath, stay with your hand on your heart, and you don't have to force anything. You're not trying to fix or figure anything out. You're just letting your system know it's safe to feel. It's safe to be here. I'm not abandoning myself anymore. And this practice helps create safety around emotions that may have felt too big or too hidden for too long. And it gives your grief a place to rest without being pushed away. You can return to this anytime, and when something stirs unexpectedly, when you feel disconnected from yourself, or when you simply want to acknowledge that something mattered, even if it wasn't named by others. So let's now deepen this awareness with a journaling prompt to help you give even more voice to what's been unspoken. As we close this time together, I want to offer you a way to keep connecting with what's rising, to give your grief more space, more acknowledgement, and more love. So here's your journaling prompt for today. What have I been grieving quietly? And what would I say to it if I gave it a voice? So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. What have I been grieving quietly? And what would I say to it if I gave it a voice? And this might be a relationship, a version of you that had to go silent to survive, a dream that never had the chance to grow, or a loss that never got named. And let yourself write freely. Let the words come from the part of you that never had a chance to speak. You don't need to analyze or make it perfect. Just give it space, give it breath, give it truth. And if you find yourself unsure of what to say, try beginning with, I see you now, or you matter to me, even if no one else knew. And this is how grief begins to move gently, honestly, in connection with yourself. So you spent so much of your life carrying things no one else saw, and today I want you to reflect something back to you that maybe you haven't heard in a while. Your pain is valid, your grief is real, and you don't have to carry it alone anymore. If something stirred in you during this session, if you felt seen, softened, or even just a little less alone, I invite you to take one gentle step forward and further here. And that's to go ahead and book a free healing connection call with me. It's a 30-minute call where you can share what you've been holding, ask for what you need, and explore one supportive next step to move forward. There's no pressure, no expectations, just presence, just care. And you'll find a link in the comments, and I would be honored to hold space with you. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for showing up for the parts of you that have gone unseen for too long. You are worthy of healing. You are worthy of support. You are worthy of peace. I'll see you next time for another healing step session. Until then, be so gentle with your heart. Bye-bye.